connect. Is that normal?
Yeah. So that's us. That's
Okay.
so that's the security we've done. That we're making where everyone comes in that way, and then we bring them forward so that no one can get in. So there's no possible link anywhere in the world that people can actually get in.
We're live.
And we're live.
Okay. Okay, so you're actually connecting me when it's...
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I see a little message that says somebody's in the waiting room or whatever, but... so the first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda, because I do not have it in front of me, because I can't figure out how to do it.
Move approval of the agenda.
Actually, I have it on my phone. It's just minuscule. Okay, I can use my phone.
They haven't called the meeting to order yet.
No.
Is Rob here?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so are we ready?
Whenever you
As
are.
a guest.
Yeah.
Oh, and Mark is here.
And
Hi, Mark.
Mark dressed up for the occasion.
I showered. I just haven't brushed my hair.
You have a minute.
Do you still want the agenda up?
No, I can read it from my phone.
Okay.
Are we ready?
Whenever you are.
Okay. I'd like to call the May meeting of the Rules and City Government Committee to order. Please note for the record, Alderman Arnett and Alderman Savage are in attendance, and we are joined by Alderman Rodriguez. Was there another alderman? Did I?
Not right now.
No.
Okay, great. The first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Oh, before you
Is
do
there a
that.
second?
Second.
Ms. Green?
0520 is on the agenda for tonight, but you guys left the public hearing open, so that will need to be removed from your agenda.
Okay.
Okay, is that accessory dwellings?
That is city council meetings order.
Okay.
So let me ask you about that. And I see that the city attorney's on there. What are the actual rules? So if the public hearing is open, does that mean that the committee can't discuss this legislation, or does it mean the committee can't take an official action recommending something regarding this legislation?
Mr. Lyles?
Yes, I'm thinking about it. Basically, there's some confusion in the code as it relates to this, and so we're trying to think about and hopefully prepare for you some corrections. Basically, right now as it's written, once it's set for public hearing, there is a time frame, and forgive me, Takia and I have been discussing this today. I think there's a time frame whereby it's got to go to the public hearing and then get referred back to the committee. In this instance, we have not had the public hearing for it to then be closed and then get referred back to the committee. Now, I think that the committee can review it, but it wouldn't necessarily jive with the code. So we kind of got to correct some things in that regard, and we're trying to work through it at the same time while we're actually going through the process here.
Oh, so that would not preclude us having a discussion about it. It's just that we probably shouldn't take an action on it because the community has not had an opportunity.
Well, it's interesting because the code says one thing, but I think your intent is something else. Basically, what the code says is open and close the hearing, then refer it to committee. Because the hearing has stayed open and the mayor has not closed it, then it's technically under the code not supposed to go back on your agenda for committee deliberation or consideration even. Your code is written very restrictively, and it probably should not be.
Okay.
Michael, can you tell us where in the code you're looking for that, looking at that? It's in Title 2, right?
You're muted, Mr. Lyles. Julian, can you?
Okay, yes. Yeah. Let me try to find it for you, and I'll come right
Okay.
back on once I find it.
All right. Yeah, you're right, though. We've got to get this all sorted out because there's just a lot of confusion about where things are. I'm also going to ask, I get very confused when things are postponed. There's no place that I know of where I can go to see when they're postponed until. So things keep coming onto the agenda for the council that I think are postponed, and they're there again. So I think you're right. This is just something we need to look at and get cleaned up.
Okay, I will, the motion on the floor is to approve the agenda as written, but do we want to amend that to remove 0520? Is it 0520 or 0519?
It's 0520. I will be very
0520.
happy to defer to the wisdom of the city attorney. I agree it's something we got to get cleared up.
And I will say before you go to the vote that it is 2.16.180 public hearings where the language is confusing and we want to unconfuse it. We've already got our attention to it. And what we're trying to give you is maximum flexibility in the ordinance or the code without disturbing kind of a process that you want to lay out. And right now, the confusion is limiting what you can do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lyles. So the motion on the floor is to approve the agenda with the elimination of 0520.
That's correct.
Correct?
That is correct.
Okay, are we ready for the vote?
Is there a second?
I'll
Yes.
second that.
Rob seconded it. Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next item is business for the committee. Approval of the minutes from the April 14th meeting.
I move approval of the minutes from the April 14th meeting.
Second.
Okay, further discussion?
Well,
Here.
I would just note in passing that our 1720, which is the performance standards, was on there, and at the committee meeting, my recollection is that we did want to have further dialogue with Lynn Farrow in terms of the actual content and structure. We did vote to approve it, but I would suggest that maybe after the budget has calmed down a little bit, and because I think those were so successful, but were kind of variable across departments, that it's something the committee might want to put back on the agenda. And here's Takia with her hand up.
That's exactly what you've, sorry, thank you. That's exactly what you voted to do, to wait until after the budget to bring back R17.
Right, you're right. I just, I thought we approved it, but it says postpone.
Mhm.
So again, I move approval of the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, thank you. Next item, legislation before the committee. 03819, Housing and Community Development Committee, for the purpose of renaming the Housing and Community Development Committee, clarifying certain powers and functions, and making stylistic changes. I think Alderman Rodriguez, this is your legislation.
Yeah, that's correct.
Would you like to speak to it at this time?
Sure. So this legislation was put forward when I was chairing the Housing Committee. As you know, the Housing and Human Welfare Committee has a subcommittee called the Housing and Community Development Committee. And the Housing and Community Development Committee is a committee made up of the 3 alderpersons that make up the Housing and Human Welfare Committee, and I think it's 4 other civilians or community members, and including a representative from HACA. And this legislation initially was just going to be a simple change, like adding the word equity into the names to call it Housing and Community Equity Development, to like just emphasize the mission of the subcommittee being, community equity development focused. And it's the committee that debates and essentially this decides the allocations of the community development block grant money that we receive from HUD. It's the committee that's in charge of putting forward the impediments to fair housing report. That's a mandatory report to HUD as well. So in terms of the fair housing and the activities around fair housing for the city, it's a very important committee, as well as the $200,000 to $300,000 in grants, the CDBG that it extends. And so initially it was just a name. And then looking into it, Teresa Wellman recommended a few additional changes because it had some kind of, the committee had some authoritative power that wasn't actually necessary, or it was overbroad in the sense that it said stuff like that the committee had a hiring decision or power over housing employees or over city employees, which it can't have. And so we decided to remove that, clean that up. Then there were some other issues around what a quorum meant, because before, if 2 out of the 3 alderpersons were not present, even at a meeting, even if there were a majority of the committee members present, there still wasn't a quorum, so no business could be conducted. So what's changed is that as long as there's 4 out of 7 or majority present, regardless of if they're council members or not, then there's a quorum and business can be conducted for the efficiency of that committee. And so those are the substantive changes or the reasons for this ordinance. There was some discussion. I know Alderman Savage had a few questions around this, because this is a weird hybrid that no other committee or commission has in terms of a mix of council members and community members. There was some discussion around whether it should be a pure commission, community members commission, or not, and hybrid. And so that's not really where I was coming at from it. I don't know. I see Alderman Gay's online too, as he's the chair now of the housing committee. I'm sure he has some more comments or feedback around that. But the idea around community members being in this committee is really important, obviously, because the community block grants go through this committee. I think it's important to have a diverse set of community members who have expertise in the area, having input into where those dollars go.
Alderman Gay, do you have anything to add about your legislation?
Not this particular bill. I support it as it is. I think they made the appropriate amendments.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And I'll speak to the Rules Committee amendments. Alderman Savage?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think because one of the things I do have an amendment I'd like to talk about, because we had this conversation with the city attorney last time, and I don't really see why the council should actually be on this commission unless there's some compelling reason why or some history. But I think it'd be more appropriate to have it be more akin to the Maritime Advisory Board, where in that case the aldermen from wards 1, 8, and 7 get to appoint somebody to the Maritime Advisory Board. And in this case, I would suggest that the 3 members of the Housing Committee, the actual council committee, each get to appoint 1 person to the board, to the commission. That just keeps the council separated out. That was just my idea. I'd like to know from the city attorney if that would work, and also from the sponsors if that would be a friendly kind of amendment.
Mr. Lyles, could you answer that?
Yes, I think that it would work, and it would be in line and consistent with how you run other commissions of this type. since the council already has a standing committee that does essentially the same work. The potential that you have in continuing the way it's going is for a conflict with, 3 members of the council thinking one particular way. And so if a decision or a recommendation comes back to the council, it may be intruding upon your prerogative because you have at least a large number of council members. So I agree with Alderman Savage. There is no problem with doing it, taking the council members off. You do have a standing committee that deals with the same issues, so you're well within your rights to do that as well, and probably not step on some of the things that might be happening with this commission or committee.
Would they still have the authority to deal with CDBG grants?
The authority for the commission is limited in that we'd have to, I think they do right now. When I say limited, there was some limitation because the council people were on it. If you take the council people off of it, then their ability to deal with CDBG grants becomes more expanded, because some of the things that we talked about before with council members stepping into the executive and implementation functions, by delegating this function to non-council members, they do have the expanded ability to do CDBG grants, continuing with that with no problem.
Do we have any other boards or commissions that oversee a significant amount, if any, funding and making decisions about how that funding is to be used?
Well, no. What you're getting from the commission or committee in this regard with respect to CDBG is their recommendation. They're not there is an office under a department that actually is the one that carries out and implements the application for the grant. But they would have some review responsibilities, but it's only review responsibilities with respect to the CDBG grant. They really won't be able to dictate anything about the grant unless you give them that authority, and then we'd have to be very, very careful that we're doing it in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Alderman Arnett, and then Alderman Gay, and
So
then Teresa's in the room.
Well, she's on the phone. So I think there are some parallel structures between the Transportation Board and the Transportation Committee. I think that the amendment that Alderman Gay offered was an attempt to address this problem of having council members making these things that are really prerogatives of the administration. I kind of favor Alderman Savage's approach of having the council committee and separately this committee. One would presume they would continue to work closely with each other as they have, and I think Teresa can speak to that when you recognize her, Madam Chair. But when we started looking at this, more and more complications of this awkward hybrid structure kept coming up. I'm not interested in any way diminishing the latitudes of the council committee as it's currently constituted or will be in the future. But I do think we really could make a stronger situation by having a council committee with council authorities, legislative authorities, policy-making authorities, and then another body that is doing the things that are part of their administrative duties and so forth, and will be coming to the city council meeting when they need help from the city council, either a discussion about monetary things, which are in the council's purview, budget things, but also in terms of any kind of legislative thing. So, and I kind of like the way the city manager, city attorney is trying to get us all sorted out, because we've kind of gotten over time overlapped on each other. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking that this is a healthy discussion, but I'm not interested in limiting the prerogatives of any of the council members, particularly those who thankfully are spending the time looking at these issues. I think we really do need to have a strong council presence looking at these housing issues.
Alderman Gay.
Thanks. Yeah. My first response is that I would argue that they are not the same committees. Although they have similar titles and you may think that they operate the same, I think they operate completely different. Housing and what is the Housing and Community Development Committee as it stands now deals more with community responses, looking at the stock of affordable housing and how we can continue to push for affordable housing within the city, building community relationships. I think it's also important that that an older person serves on that committee and oversees the CBGG grants and has input in that as well. I'm not sure how taking older people off would expand that role. While the Housing and Human Welfare Committee, I think, focuses on something completely different. And I think that's the same argument that I brought to you when this committee first heard it, and you all agreed, and it was sent to the council to be passed, and then it was brought back with opposing arguments. So I'm not sure where that came from.
Alderman Arnett, and then Alderman Rodriguez, and then I'm going to ask Ms. Wellman to share with us her feelings about it. Alderman Arnett.
Duan, your amendment to this seems to eviscerate the committee, because if you look at the language in the ordinance now on page 2, section C, there are all kinds of plans to implement housing and community development projects throughout the city. That's not a council power. Exercise powers and functions of redevelopment and renewal. That's not a council power, and so on. And your amendment takes all of that out and essentially makes this committee the same as the city council committee and eviscerates the powers that the committee and the work that Teresa Wellman and Planning and Zoning do. So, it seems to me like you're making the two committees with your amendment be the same when we really don't want them to be the same.
I think we also discussed at the last meeting that amendment was not originally added, then it was, and then it was taken away. And I don't believe that it is supposed to be in the final form of this. And I'm looking for the email now that is supports that.
Your amendment is attached to the legislation. Should it not be?
I don't believe 4 should be.
Well, then we're in trouble, because now we're directly violating what the city attorney said, which is this is giving city council members, by virtue of being on this committee, prerogatives that don't belong to the council and do belong to the administration. So that whole section C now it is inappropriate for council members to be on there for at least significant portions of section C on page 2.
Go ahead, Mark.
Alderman Gay, you can respond to him.
Is that where you were speaking to Mr. City Attorney in regards to removing the council so that the powers can be expanded? I believe maybe I got confused there. Is that why we were removing?
This is because what happens when the council is on a commission or committee like this, your powers of that committee are limited, because the power of the council members is somewhat limited by their function. Once you start adding them to executive committees, then you take away the power of that committee to do the thing that the executive branch is empowered to do, or a committee that the council delegates to do it. So that's the issue. If you remove the alderman persons from the committee, then the committee's executive power can be expanded to a degree.
Madam Chair, I have to interject. There is no executive branch or legislative branch in our code. In fact, the board branch only shows up in our code if you do a search, having to do with trees and trimming and things like that. But there is an administration and a council, which are policymakers. So I agree with the sense of what the city attorney is saying, and that this section C is a problem because it is getting into administrative functions that are not the powers of the council. Therefore, we have to do something with section C if we're going to have this language in that says that they're going to implement and they're going to exercise powers and so forth. Those are very clearly powers that are the prerogative of the administrative staff and not powers that are the powers of the elected officials, other than the mayor by virtue of him being the chief executive officer.
Alderman Rodriguez.
You're on mute. Mute.
You should have been better about that. Thank you. Haven't been on the committee for a while and for a couple of years. And the first year, the main power as I saw it acting day to day in the committee was the granting of the CDBG funds. And so the first year I was on it, it was essentially, it was like Teresa Wellman and a couple others, maybe in the finance director office, come up with a series of recommendations of how to allocate the CDBG funds. Then that went to the Housing Community Development Committee, and we discussed and maybe shuffled things around, and there were still recommendations, and then they were passed on to the full council during budget deliberations, and then the council members negotiated and moved stuff around, and then we finally approved that as part of the budget, and it was allocated that way. In the second year, after Teresa looked into it, Teresa Sutherland, the former city manager, looked into it and decided that the committee itself had the full final say on how the allocations were going to be made. So the Housing and Community Development Committee. So it was still the same process. And then Teresa Wellman can correct me if I'm wrong or I'm missing something right now. But the office, like Teresa Wellman and other staff members, came up with the recommendations. Then they went to the Housing and Community Development Committee. And then we shuffled things around, and it was the final allocation. And the only council level decision was whether to approve the entire CDBG pool of money, like yes or no, to be included or not. And in the council, at the council level, no longer had the authority or power to allocate or decide. So I think there's probably needs to be some clearing up about that, because the last 2 years it operated differently. So I don't have a strong position. I'll defer to Duan on whether it should be a mix of pure community members, or a mix of council and commission members. But I'm just laying out there kind of what the process has been like.
Are you, as the sponsor of the legislation, in support of Alderman Savage's amendment?
I mean, I can understand it. I can't say right now that yes, it should be solely community members or it should remain a hybrid. I'm not one way or the other right now, but I understand it, and I see the benefits of it, and I also see the benefits of a hybrid model. But it also depends on what the final process is. Like, does it stay with the committee, the final allocation members, or does it stay with the council as the ultimate decision?
Ross, I see your hand, but before I recognize you, I'm going to call on Teresa Wellman to share with us, because Teresa has all of the historical knowledge about the operations of this committee. Teresa, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear
Hello?
you.
Oh, good. I was having a little problem there. So this is all very confusing, but I'll try to give you just a little bit of the history. I've been with the city for almost 23 years now, so I've been liaison on this committee for that length of time. When I first started, the Housing and Human Welfare Committee wasn't very active. I don't think many of the standing committees were very active. So all the housing and community development activity came through the housing and community development committee. And basically what that committee did was just reviewed the community development block grant allocations. It's almost a 4-meeting process. So it takes up a good portion of the committee's time. And then they would have other issues that they would deal with after the CDBG recommendations went through. Then Hillary came, and the standing committees got very active and started meeting. And so what we did was we met at the same time. So the Housing and Community Development Committee and the Housing and Human Welfare Committee, since they were the same people basically, held the meetings together. And we did that for a number of years until maybe 3 years ago when the city clerk said that we couldn't do that anymore, that it was illegal and that we had to meet separately. So then the committees then began to meet separately. So that's, I think that might clear up some of the questions you had about, how the different committees interacted with each other.
Teresa, how do you feel about the alderwomen on the committee? I mean, about their role on the committee.
It does present a problem because it makes the committee more political. The committee, HUD would prefer that the committee be more non-political. There's no HUD requirement to have CDBG go through this committee. The only requirement HUD has is that the mayor sign the certifications, and they like to see the council bless the plans. And but other than that, there's no requirement for CDBG to go through this process through a committee. Some communities just have staff make a recommendation to the mayor. Some communities have committees, but they're all residents. There isn't any that I know in Maryland, a Housing and Community Development Committee that has older people or elected officials on it. So we're kind of an anomaly. It does, having the aldermen does make it political, because the 3 aldermen that are on the committee, if they have favorite organizations that they want to fund, it kind of stacks the deck for some people, I think, in a way. So, and other times it's been, well, you've talked about the quorum, but that quorum, the way it is now, has been a problem with having to have 2 aldermen to have a quorum. It's sometimes very difficult to get 2 aldermen, to get that many aldermen to the meetings. I mean, we've had meetings where there were 4 people from the community and no aldermen. So we didn't have a quorum, but we had a speaker, things like that. So I'd like to know what the city feels like it needs in terms of, what do the aldermen need from a committee? Because it's really for the alder people, the committee, to give them information that they need.
Well, we don't have an answer, it sounds like.
Well,
thank you, Teresa. Alderman Arnett and then Alderman Savage.
let Rob go first, but I do want to speak after that and respond to some of the things that Mark said. But Rob's been waiting patiently.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I still haven't heard a compelling reason to have the council on this commission. Because that would be, again, it would be the only commission where we actually serve, and I'm not sure the reason for that. I think it was just a relic from the past. I think we should move forward and try to fix it. We've heard, I think, some good reasons from Ms. Wellman and from the city attorney about how it could benefit from getting the council off of that committee. The city attorney is saying they'd be able to have a more robust discussion about the community grant program, which I think would be beneficial. And remember, the council always gets the final say when it comes, because it's going to be in the budget anyway. The finance committee ended up making recommendations changing the grant program allocations. So I think we also need to look at the purpose of these commissions. Their purpose, as Ms. Wellman had said, they're to serve the council and to make recommendations to us. We're essentially delegating authority to them and empowering them to take deep dives on these issues that we don't necessarily have the time to do and report back to us. I think having us on the committee gets in the way of that, gets in the way of their objectivity, and in the way of having extra members on there who could provide a nice diversity of viewpoints. So again, I do still support my amendment, and but look forward to hearing from others.
Alderman Savage, where, and I'm looking at the legislation, where would you place your amendment?
So the way it would be in page 1, line 44, and it would reword it so that it would say the commission consists of 7 members, 3 of whom are appointed by the 3 members of the Housing and Human Welfare Committee of the City Council, the chair of the Annapolis Housing Authority or the chair's designee, and 3 residents of the city who possess a demonstrated interest in housing and community development concerns and who shall be appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the City Council. So it really only changes after the 7 member, it would strike who are and just insert 3 of whom are appointed by, to kind of, I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but that seemed like the easiest.
So, Madam Chair,
may I ask Mr. Lyles if he wants to weigh in?
Yeah, that's fine. Just want to change to the wording instead of appointed, selected by.
Right.
Term, because the council appoints, so selection would be appropriate term there.
Okay.
So I second that motion to recommend. I also would say that obviates the amendment that's attributed to Alderman Gay, but Dewan, I don't think you're interested in anymore. I did want to comment briefly about some of the remarks that you made, Mark. As far as I know, the city attorney is the only person who has the authority to interpret city policy. The city manager, past or present, doesn't. And I think we're in the process of trying to undo some of those interpretations that were not correct. I totally support the current city attorney's efforts to get us sorted out. I totally support Alderman Savage's amendment because I think that it clears up a lot of the problems. We can go ahead and change the name. We can go ahead and keep that connection between the city council members committee, the housing committee, and this authority. We can in some ways get the council members out of the way of this committee's operation because they're not affecting the having the quorum, but also because then the language in section C on page 2 is perfectly legitimate. It is exactly within the realm of the administration, those things to do, like implementing housing and community development projects and those sorts of things. Mark and Dewana, I think the change that Rob is offering really does keep that your committee in close concert with. And I think that one of the things that Teresa said is she's right. Over time, the 2 committees sort of fell into meeting with each other and sort of did a Vulcan mind meld, if you will, live long and prosper. And that's how we kind of got into trouble. And I appreciate you both bringing this legislation up because I think it's addressing something that it does need to get sorted out and clarified. So I know I'm talked too long, so I'll stop now.
Thank you. Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Chairwoman Finlayson. I think it is grossly irresponsible to allow individuals who are not solely focused on providing affordable housing and increasing and protecting the stock of affordable housing within our city to almost dismantle a committee that is solely focused on that. The relationship that these committees have, there is none. If you look at the city code, which I have pulled up in front of me with both committees, the Housing and Human Welfare Committee shall consider issues of housing and matters affecting the general health, welfare, and quality of the life of the residents in the city of Annapolis. That's what we do there. Although the members are the same, we do something completely separate on that committee. This committee focuses on as I mentioned previously, this committee focuses on housing stock, affordability, working with the federal government, looking at grants. We're looking now at the 5-year Consolidated Housing Community Development Plan, which I don't think that other members of the council are reading. I think that it's important that we stay on this council and that we have a pulse and understanding of what is taking place in housing within the city of Annapolis. I enjoy serving on this committee and learning from Teresa what it takes to put housing in a place where it needs to be in the city. And I think that if you don't want to serve on this committee, that's completely fine. But all the people that are there, I'm fine with it. I don't see why we need to take us away. It operates fine. They're two completely separate committees with completely separate focuses. So to try to snug one under the other and say, oh, well, we can tie these two in it, that's not how the code is written.
Well, Alderman Savage, in just one moment. We don't have a choice for the most part in council committees. The mayor selects who's serving on which committees. So are you suggesting that it be an optional choice for the alderman?
I mean, that would satisfy it. I think that's a way to get to a mutual agreement because I don't intend to leave the committee.
Okay. Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alderman Gay, I don't think there's no intention here to dismantle anything. It's to help these commissions function more effectively. I mean, if you follow your logic, I'd be wanting to serve wanting a spot on the Environmental Commission, or the Conservancy Board. And no, I mean, those are obviously I'm very interested in, and I often attend. Well, I think Alderwoman Tierney attends more than I do at this point. But, we attend and listen and still participate in the conversation, which you'd still be able to do. But there's no, I think by getting us off these committees again will allow them to function and fulfill their role more effectively otherwise.
Alderman Arnett and then Alderman Gay.
So, Madam Chair, I think we have a problem here. It's an either-or problem. I do like the amendment that Alderman Savage is offering, but if Alderman Gay and Rodriguez don't like that, then I think our advice that we've received from the city attorney is we have no alternative but to go in and amend Section C on the ordinance here to look like Alderman Gay's amendment that he offered, which I subscribe eviscerates the purpose of the committee. It does not allow the committee then to implement the housing and community development projects throughout the city, exercise all of the powers and functions of redevelopment and urban renewal, subject to limitations of the law, manage and improve housing stock in the city. All of those things cannot be done by council members. And so that takes us back to the amendment that Alderman Gay offered, which strikes all of that and makes this committee much more vanilla and much more like the existing city council standing committee. It's one or the other. I frankly think it's better to go in the direction that Alderman Savage is going. And I really don't see, I would ask the city attorney for an opinion, but I don't see how we can pass, recommend passage of this legislation with this very clear problem in section C about the powers. That it is clearly crossing a boundary.
Mr. Lyles?
I wholeheartedly agree with Alderman Arnett. The reason I came up with the language for Alderman Gay was because I saw that conflict in the duties there for the members of the council. Without that, without the council members on the committee, then there's really no need for me to offer any amending language to keep it within the legislative capacity. So yes, one or the other.
So are you suggesting, are you speaking in support of Alderman Gay's amendment or not?
Well, it's one or the other. It's for the committee to decide, and then of course to the council, but it's one or the other. It's not, you can't have a blending of the two. Right. Either choose the amendment with the vanilla approach because the council people are on the committee, or expand the committee's functions by taking the alder people off of it.
But letting the alder people appoint the members that are on.
Yeah. Well, and really technically alder people have the authority to go to any of these committee meetings and sit and listen and converse. You're almost like ex officio members of these committees, although you don't vote. And you would expect to be listening, I think, independently should these matters come back before you as a council member, as though you really hadn't heard anything, you know. So it's either or.
Alderman Gay and then Alderwoman Tierney.
Yeah, thank you. I'm well aware of my ability to sit in any meeting. I mean, I can sit in a meeting at McDonald's too. So that doesn't have any, I think that, yeah, that's an option for anything. I have just two questions. The first is, because now you're bringing up the legal concerns of it. How is this, if the committee has been operating illegally, how has it been allowed to do so for this long period of time, and why now is there a concern? Why are you shaking your head? I thought that's what I heard. Answer me if I'm wrong.
No, look, Duan, we do incredible numbers of things. That's what's driving the city attorney crazy. And Teresa Wellman, I might add, we're doing an incredible number of things, not knowing any better. That's all a part of continuous improvement. And it is because you looked into this and Mark looked into this, that this really came to light. And I still think we can have it one way or the other, but we can't have it both ways. And there's nothing personal about it. I really appreciate the zeal both of you are bringing to the council and to this area. And I think it's one of the reasons why you both ran. And I'm getting the sense that you are feeling that we or this would take power away from you. I really don't see it.
I enjoy serving on the committee, and I enjoy the knowledge that Teresa Wellman brings to the city.
Right.
And I think that it's important for us to stay there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be fighting for it.
Right. So,
Alderwoman, I'm calling on Alderwoman Tierney, who hasn't had an opportunity. Her hand's been up. I don't know what you're saying.
You're can't. Mute.
You're on mute.
Okay, I had to do alternate A, whatever that was. Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I've been on the committees, as Mark has, for a couple of years now, and there's always been confusion and some debate on this that has not been productive because here we are. And so I guess after all of this and talking to Teresa Wellman, I really trust her judgment on this, and she questioned all along the way we were doing it, because of the role of the grants and the, politicizing them. So I think Dewan is absolutely correct. There are wonderful discussions in that committee and with residents, and we have great discussions, and that could still happen because you can attend and be a liaison. So I fully support my colleague Alderman Savage's amendment to define the role of that commission, as reviewing the grants, committee reviewing the grants. I wish they were named differently because they're so confusing.
Yeah.
And frame it on something that works, which is, for example, the environmental committee, as it does with the commission, and attending those two, that there are good discussions that happen at those commission meetings where if they don't, see the politicians, they are able to speak more freely. I sense that. So that's just my comments.
This is sad. It really is. It's sad.
I'm not disbanding it, Dwan. I just think
I'm saying it's sad.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor. Alderman Savage, I'm going to ask you once more before we take a vote on your amendment. Could you tell us once more? I think you said it would be inserted in line 44 of page 1.
Yes, page 1, line 44, after 7-member, strike who are and insert 3 of whom are, what was the word? The attorney said represented by, I think he said.
Selected by.
Selected by.
Mm-hmm.
The, where am I? Yeah, and just put that, 3 of whom are selected by, and then it'll read correctly after that point. So they'll be selected by the Housing and Human Welfare Committee members.
Okay, Ms. Green?
Is this connected to the legislation, or are you presenting this now?
This is an amendment could be from the Rules Committee.
Right, but what I'm saying
on the floor.
Is this,
So,
okay, so
yeah,
can you slow that down?
Yeah, we can only, one person can talk at a time. Ms. Green?
So what I was asking, was it on the floor or was it already connected? If it's on the floor, you can't read it straight through like that for me to get it.
You don't know, you're not clear on where this amendment goes?
Because I don't have it, so I need him to slow down when he's reading it so that I can capture it.
Okay,
I can just email it to you if you'd like.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Are the members of the committee clear, Alderman Arnett, on what the motion is?
Yes.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the Savage amendment, please say aye.
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 Okay. We already approved the 3 Rules Committee amendments that are attached. So that takes us to the original legislation. I think, I'm sorry, Alderman Gay's amendment. I don't think we took a vote on Alderman Gay's amendment, did we?
No, we did not.
Not today. I didn't know whether we had last week or during our last meeting. Ms. Green, did the Rules Committee take a position on the Gay amendment at our last meeting?
I don't think we had it at that point. I think the city attorney drafted it after our meeting in response to our discussion at that meeting.
Okay.
So I would make a motion that we not accept the Gay amendment because it really neutralizes or makes vanilla the committee.
Is there a second?
Nice excuse.
Is there a second? Okay, I read his lips. Okay. Yeah. Ms. Green?
So to be clear, because you really don't have to vote on that. If you're not accepting it, you're not accepting it.
Which one, the second one or the first, Rob's amendment or the second?
For anyone's amendment other than the ones that you're going to do yourselves, you really don't have to vote on those because they're still going to go to the full council.
Yeah,
it is attached to our legislation, however.
Right.
Mr. Files?
Takia is correct. So you can do it either way. So since you have a motion and a second, you can go ahead and vote down the Gay amendment as you're calling it, and then that would be fine.
Don't call it the Gay amendment. It's not an amendment.
Okay.
But it'll still go to the full
Formerly
council
known
for
as
a
Prince.
vote.
Amendment number, I think it's amendment number 4.
Yes, I'm looking at the document. It says amendment number 4, gay.
You can say, call it amendment number 4.
Right.
And there's a motion in the second, Madam Chair. So
Yes.
You can vote to oppose it.
Okay, so we're ready for the vote on amendment number 4. All in favor, please say aye.
In favor of opposing or striking?
Yes.
Yes.
The motion is to oppose amendment number 4.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we've dispatched with that. So now we have 03819 as amended by the Rules Committee. Can I get a motion?
I
To
move that
support.
we recommend favorably 03819 with the 4 amendments from the Rules Committee.
I second that motion.
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. Man, is that the end of our agenda? Just kidding.
Yeah, well, no, now we get to the hard part.
May I, before we move on, the next item is 03919, accessory dwelling units. Alderman Arnett?
Yes, Madam Chair, I feel discomfort. I don't want Alderman Gay or any other alderperson to be unhappy with the actions of the committees, and I don't know how we ameliorate that, but I think it's important that we have some further discussion. That this is trying to operate in a legal fashion, I believe, maintaining the integrity of the committee as it is structured to be. But I don't know what we do further, but I am always uncomfortable when one of our colleagues is uncomfortable, or unhappy. But I just wanted to note that for the record.
Alderman Arnett, are you referring to 03919?
No, 38. There'll be plenty of discomfort for 03919 too, but I was talking about 38.
I think that's where we are now. Are we not? Are we not on 03919?
Yes.
We are now.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So thank you for your comments on 038. And Alderman Gay, you understand it is not personal. Please.
Yeah, it seemed like it.
Well, that's the problem.
Okay. So Alderman Arnett, what are we going to do with accessory dwelling units?
Well, Madam Chair, I think that the Planning Commission gave us a very good report. It pointed out a lot of things that need to be cleared up, and they unanimously rejected the legislation as it stands. At the City Council last meeting, not last night, but the one before, when we had discussion about closing the public hearing, it was stated at that time from both Alderman Gay and Rodriguez that they had heard the Planning Commission and they had significant amendments to make to this legislation. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing that. But I have to say, in going through the code, both 2164 and 2150, this is a wholesale rezoning. It essentially eliminates single-family zoning, maybe for a good purpose, maybe not. But I can say without any doubt that my constituents don't want to be party to that. I would go on to say that I think that the legislation is well intended, but doesn't really take into account the likely consequences of it. And I would refer everyone to the Planning Commission's report, page 2, where it's talking about the use of accessory dwelling units, and it says there was considerable concern that the ADUs would be used primarily for short-term rentals. I think there is that, but it goes on to say, on the other hand, despite some being used for short-term rentals, there may be other real benefits to ADUs, such as supplemental income to facilitate family property ownership by lower income residents. I would submit that that is really very unrealistic. I actually looked at converting my garage to having a finished unit over the garage. And the cost to do that ranged from $120,000 to $154,000. That was beyond my means. I wasn't willing to make that investment. I cannot believe that there are going to be people that are in areas of the city where this is likely to happen that are going to have that, or at least not have that without some kind of speculation behind it. So one of my major worries is not so much about my ward. My worry is about the wards where there is already affordable housing, where people really can live in those homes, who are going to be driven out by speculators that are going to see an opportunity. There's an example of it right on my street, where there was a long-term Black-owned family, the Carrolls, Mr. John Carroll was on the Planning Commission for years and years, decades ago. He became incapacitated. The house went to one of his nieces. It's been purchased, or it's now owned by someone who wants to tear down the existing home, build a new unit that has a primary unit, a rental unit in the basement, and a rental unit over the garage. A dramatic change in a single-family neighborhood, in a single-family neighborhood that already has a third of the homes on my street that have accessory dwelling units, none of which are rented to anyone, with one possible exception of one maybe going out part-time for short-term rentals. I've done a survey in the Peninsular Ward 8. I've only been able to uncover one accessory dwelling unit that is in fact rented to a teacher. It's on 4th Street. None of the other accessory dwelling units can we find where they're being used for the intended purpose, which is to create workforce and low-income housing. Now, you can argue that we can just pass this and we'll let nature take its course. I cannot sanction changing my entire zoning, which happens to be R2NC, or R2, or R1, or R1A, or R1B, from single family, wholesale, from single family to multifamily dwelling units. And in addition, there are changes in the bulk things that affect height and setbacks and those sorts of things. So I don't think this legislation, I understand the intent, but I don't think that it is appropriate, and I don't think it will accomplish the intended goal. So, and I can tell you that I am speaking for everyone who has spoken to me, all but one constituent, and that happens to be the woman who is renting a house to the teacher. And she wants to be able to continue to do that, which she can. There are, and I think if we look, and part of the Planning Commission said that we need to go look at what are all of the existing accessory dwelling units and how do we grandfather them, what are going to be the rules. None of that is laid out in this legislation. It is really a major change to zoning in the city.
Alderman,
I have nothing to say.
Take a breath. Alderman Savage, and then Alderman Rodriguez, and then I'm going to ask Director Nash to help us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I am in support of this legislation. I've looked at Montgomery County's ADU program, and I've tried to take some things from that to make improvements on ours. But Alderman Rodriguez is already well ahead of me and has amendments that I think. So my point is, I think rather than just throw this out entirely, I think it can have some benefits, and I think we can adjust it to make sure it addresses some of the concerns that we've heard from the community and both the Planning Commission. And I think Alderman Rodriguez's amendments do just that. They would reduce the size, which is one of the things that the Planning Commission mentioned. So his amendment would reduce it from 1,000 square feet maximum to 800 square feet. And the other amendment would prevent any kind of, it would essentially prohibit using ADUs for short-term rentals. So they would not be able to get short-term rental licenses, which would help to ensure that those who do build these or convert these, that they can only essentially use them for long-term rentals, which again would help contribute more clearly and directly to the housing issue and the issue of affordable housing. And the third amendment, I would like some more explanation about. But
point of information.
I'm going to ask Alderman Rodriguez to speak to his amendment, so we don't have to go through those. I think he should.
Madam Chair, I do not have these amendments.
They're attached, and it's called the Rodriguez Amendment.
Not on mine.
It's attached on your document.
Go
down.
The document I have is 03919 PC finding, Planning Commission findings. I do not have any other attached amendments.
Alderman, what I'm looking at on the agenda, it lists the legislation, staff report, fiscal impact, planning and zoning staff report, Planning Commission findings and recommendations, and amendments 1 through 3, Rodriguez amendments.
I do not have those, and would certainly like to see them.
Ms. Green, where can he go? Can he go to Legistar?
Yes, it's attached to the legislation. We also have it queued up if you want us to put it on the screen right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would have been good to have in preparation for this meeting.
Madam Chair, could I make one final comment?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay. So the only thing I'd just like to say is I think there are some other things just to throw out there that I would like to discuss about other potential amendments to see if there are improvements we should make in regards to parking. And I had a number of questions for Dr. Nash about some of the other Planning Commission concerns when we get to that point. Thank you.
We do have other amendments as well.
Green?
We have other amendments as well that aren't attached from Alderman Gayes, and we both have that we can put up on the screen whenever you would like.
Let's deal with Alderman Rodriguez amendments first.
Would you like us to put them on the screen?
Because that is already attached. So Alderman Rodriguez, can you give us some insight into your amendment?
Yes.
Sheila, can somebody get me those amendments? It is not in Granicus.
They are, but I will send them to you.
Julian, can you put them up on the screen? Thank you.
Yep. All right, thank you, Madam Chair. And so yeah, just a little bit of background before I jump right into the amendments. Like Dawn and I, and together with Dr. Nash and the Planning and Zoning Department, have been working on accessory dwellings unit legislation for close to probably a year now. And I know Dr. Nash's efforts, and you'll speak to them, but try to address a really middle of the road kind of approach based on the best practices that are being seen across the country and local jurisdictions. Accessory dwelling units, there's no doubt that they are one of the most important tools right now in terms of housing affordability. And I say housing affordability because it not only brings in additional income for the homeowner of the principal residence in terms of being able to have them afford their home ownership, mortgage payments, and so forth. But then it also provides an affordable housing stock option or option for people to rent out long term. So it's a win-win in that sense of someone of lower income being able to afford a place to rent, as well as the opportunity for home ownership for the principal residents. And again, there's no doubt that this is being done across the nation. There's nothing new about this. We're really behind actually most jurisdictions on this. I know there were some concerns from John Hammond, the Planning Commission called it stealth rezoning. I don't agree. I think that's a false premise. That's like a not in my backyard approach that we see every single time we try to introduce something new. Everyone says we support housing affordability. I support the premise, but I'm worried about unintended consequences, or I'm worried about this, and there's concerns. So I think we're far beyond the let's not do anything because we're worried about what we can't see or what we don't understand. Here it's very clearly what we can understand. There's even a projection of where they would be. So I completely appreciate that there would be the Planning Commission's concerns and echo some of the community concerns. The primary ones that are addressed in these amendments. I'll start with the first one, Amendment number 1. Originally, Dr. Nash had asked for and introduced it as 800 square feet in terms of size. I think after the further discussions, and Alderman Gay's intention was to increase that. Planning Commission and community has pushed back on that. So my amendment proposes to go back to the original 800 square feet. So that should hopefully address that concern from the Planning Commission. The second one, and it was never the intention for ADUs to be kind of a stealth kind of short-term rental outlet by any means. It was the purpose is to provide long-term housing, affordable stock for the community. And so because this was a concern that they might be used for short-term rentals, I offer this amendment wholeheartedly around prohibiting the use of ADUs for short-term rental licenses. So that was one of the main concerns. I know that was Debbie Dillon, the president of Eastport Civic Association, who wrote me saying she wholeheartedly supports accessory dwelling units. Her one main concern was short-term rentals, and it's being addressed here. Amendment number 3, this has to do with the grandfathering that was raised. So as we know, there's an existing stock sparse throughout the city of people who have ADUs. Alderman Arnett, if you would have built yours, it would have been an illegal structure. We won't tell anyone.
No, it wasn't. No, it would not have been.
Well, let's have Dr. Nash address that. Because apparently, we'll have Dr. Nash address that. Because, in terms of grandfathering, because right now the code doesn't allow them. In terms of grandfathering for the existing structures, initially we had thought about just allowing to grandfather the existing ones. There was some pushback or confusion around that. And so this amendment, what it offers is that for any existing ADU structures, in order to be, let's say, legal, they would have to comply with the new standards. If not, they would have to be renovated or rebuilt or whatever. So it eliminates the concerns the Planning Commission had around that. Another of their issues, which isn't an amendment because I don't think it needs to be, is around the parking that Alderman Savage brought up. So what Montgomery County does, which Alderman Savage and I spoke about earlier, and which Dr. Nash can speak to in greater detail, but I think it's already in the ordinance, is that for people to have an ADU, they will be required to have an additional off-street parking space available. And so this eases a lot of the concerns in the community around the parking issue, because in order to have an ADU, you will have to have an additional parking space. And this also eases the concerns for the people who will come out the loudest, as we know, in Eastport and Ward 1, because this will limit the availability of people to being able to build ADUs in Ward 8 and Ward 1. So they would be built more throughout the rest of the wards. because of this parking and other space issues and so forth. But I think the parking is already in there and it's reasonable. The last main concern that they had was around enforcement, but we've had several discussions around this with Dr. Nash. Like, I don't know what exactly they expect. They would be enforced just like any other buildings or any other structures that are built and inspected and licensed. They would have to be building code. They would be inspected in order to get a license. They would have to be inspected annually and so forth. So, I mean, I don't see an enforcement issue there. Instead of, if there's an issue, there's maybe in the terms of lack of resources or inspectors, and that's something we can address as a council. But I think the intention is the right one. It's a proven model. Dr. Nash and her team took the best and middle of the road approach to start out and seeing what happens and be able to make adjustments in the future if necessary. And these amendments address, I would say, the majority, the most practical concerns of the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Rodriguez. Dr. Nash, are you on? I see your picture.
Hello. Yes.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Oh, good.
Go ahead.
I think Alderman Rodriguez summarized that very well, the Planning Commission's main concerns, and I agree with Alderman Savage. I think Planning Commission had some good points, and these amendments address, a large chunk of those. So it should give people a lot more comfort, especially since by removing the grandfathering language, we have a much better handle on the potential number of new accessory dwelling units that are theoretically possible.
Dr. Nash, do you feel that this legislation would actually eliminate any shortage of affordable rentals? I mean, that's the intent, correct?
So I think this legislation would be a small piece of a strategy for the city to help create more affordable dwellings in the city, especially for people who don't qualify for subsidized housing but can't afford to live in Annapolis. And so it's often referred to as a missing middle, and that is allowing accessory dwelling units is a key strategy in bringing back this missing middle housing that's between, somewhere between a single family house and a multifamily dwelling unit.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Arnett?
So Dr. Nash, as I look at the legislation, and it is extensive, and I'm looking at 48 as well as 50, but in 48, it essentially across all zoning. So it's not just residential, it's also B zoning, it's also the PMX, PM, CMP. It eliminates single family dwelling units in the city. There are no single family dwelling zoning units left in the city. I call that an incredibly significant change to the zoning and the zoning contract with the city. I still don't have the amendments that Mark Rodriguez has put forth, but I would say to you, Rob, one of the big complaints about short-term rentals is the fact that there is no enforcement. So just saying we're not going to allow them to be used for short-term rentals is kind of laughable. They will be.
Ross, they wouldn't be eligible for short-term rental license.
I understand that, but they'll be used as short-term rentals just like now, just as we haven't gone even to go to all the people who testified before the council that they had short-term rentals and were not licensed, and we haven't even gone to go get them caught up. People like Mark Millay and Susan Margolis and a whole bunch of other people who have admitted that they have unlicensed short-term rentals. So
we're hiring a company to help us enforce those illegal short-term rentals.
yeah, and actually I asked to see that contract. I haven't seen it yet, but
I don't think we've issued the RFP. But also, so this legislation, I changed the bulk regulations for any zoning district that allows a single-family dwelling. But you aren't just immediately allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit. You have to have a certain amount of additional square footage on your lot to accommodate an additional dwelling unit. So
do we have
or these tiny lots with just one single family dwelling unit. So it really doesn't affect every single parcel with a single family dwelling unit.
Do we have the analysis to show the number of lots that would be affected? The number of lots that show that
Sorry. It is on the Planning and Zoning website, but I can send you the link for easy reference.
I would like to get that. But I really am confused about striking lines 43 through 45 on page 2. No accessory dwelling unit or structure constructed on any lot prior to the time of construction of the principal building to which it is an accessory shall be used for living purposes. First of all, we know that there are tons and tons of legally permitted units like that. Dirk and Terry Averill's unit is like that. There are, on my block, there's umpty of them. This, putting that back in, actually does the opposite of what Mark said. It now makes all those units illegal, if I understand what striking this means. It's saying if you're in existence now, if you're illegal for using as an accessory dwelling unit.
If you have a legal rental now, either because of grandfathering or whatever other bizarre reason, you basically have what is considered an accessory dwelling unit now, but it is legal, you'll be able to continue that use. But yeah, if you have an illegal dwelling unit that doesn't meet these requirements, you would not be able to continue with that use. If Alderman Rodriguez's third amendment is passed. But that was something we got a lot of concern about Planning Commission was because they were concerned it would make too many things legalized.
So I guess I'm trying to understand, on my street, we have Mike Myron's old house, now the Burks. We have the Trulios on the other side of me that has 2 rental units in it. We have Gene McCoy's with a finished room over garage. We have a number across the street. We have Patrick Shaughnessy's house. We have a number of units that were permitted. They weren't bootlegged in. We have the application for the building at the Carroll House at 110 6th Street, 610 6th Street, or 510 6th Street, I'm sorry, next to the Slauson's house. We have the Slauson's house. They were all permitted. Are they illegal now if we leave this language in, or if we unstrike it?
No, they would be the same.
So all of those existing ones. So how does this obviate the Planning Commission concern about a whole bunch of these units already being available in existence? And
I'm just wondering, are you sure those are legal units? I mean, it is.
They have permits.
They have rental licenses.
Not rental, but they're accessory dwelling units. So they're existing as accessory dwelling units. None of them are being used as rental units that I know of. None of them. But are you saying, by virtue of this, if they're existing accessory dwelling units, trying to figure out what this striking or unstriking means, if they're existing permitted accessory dwelling units now, can they legally be used for rental units, or can they not be legally?
If they do not have a rental license now and haven't had one, then we would have to see if their lot meets the bulk requirements that this ordinance proposes in order for them to be considered legal. So I don't know. I don't know if that those properties have enough lot area and if they have the right setbacks to be considered legal units.
So this gets into what exactly we mean by dwelling unit. Clearly, these units from time to time are being used to house people. So when Kathy's brother visited us and we had other company, he stayed in Gene McCoy's Frog, finished room over garage, 2 doors down. Is that a dwelling unit or is that just a legal accessory dwelling unit that isn't being rented? I mean, I think there's a huge amount of ambiguity about the existing stock of buildings, what their status is, what they can be used for or not used for.
So are you proposing we legalize all of those? Because that would make my life a lot easier.
I'm trying to figure out what we're doing, but I am saying that if I believe they are legally constructed units. They are in existence all throughout Eastport and Ward 1. They have not been rented, and as far as I know, none of them, I don't even know whether Heidi Hollick's unit for her teacher has a rental agreement. She is renting it to a teacher. But I'm saying that this leaves a whole set of people with the strikeout in there or taken out. It leaves a very ambiguous situation for a huge number of already existing structures. And could
I suspect a lot of those that you were talking about are illegal dwelling units. A dwelling unit is where you live, sleep, and cook. And, we allow we allow a lot of things that make it very easy for someone to have an illegal dwelling unit. And I know that is a criticism.
I can't hear. Are you saying illegal or legal?
Illegal. I suspect a lot of those are not legal, but
they got building permits. So
right. Well, you can build a room with a sink and a toilet and a counter, and it's pretty easy to retrofit that into an independent dwelling unit. But that does not make it a legal dwelling unit.
No, but that does speak to the practicality of the code, because you know darn well that is happening throughout the city and they're not being inspected.
Right, because there is a huge demand for that kind of housing. So this would make it easier for people to legally do that use, and then we can inspect it, make sure it's a safe quarters, make sure there's adequate parking, and incentivize, people who follow the rules, and then take enforcement action against people who aren't following the rules. And that's kind of the point of this ordinance, is that this is obviously something that's needed in the city because it's happening already in a lot of places, illegally or quasi-legally. And so that this would be a good step in terms of legalizing this practice.
Thank you, Dr. Nash. I'm going to go on to Alderman Savage and then Alderman Gay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, Alderman Arnett, I do share your concern about unintended consequences, and I do want to get some assurances from staff that there aren't and that there won't be. It just sounded like that was one thing you're concerned about. But I also am not quite clear on what the drawbacks are of increasing our stock per se of ADUs. Are people? What exactly is the impact folks are worried about? Is it in your ward? Is it the parking? Is it the potential short-term rental increase? Is it the size of the units that are a concern, or the density per block? And again, even if you have a certain density per block, what's the drawback if we can actually get the parking issues resolved? That would you're kind of increasing the density without a lot of the drawbacks you get from traditionally, installing a high rise or something with an enormous increase to traffic and things like that. So that's, I guess,
I can answer that. It's
No,
exactly the same.
Alderman, please let Dr. Nash respond, please. I think he was directing.
He asked me.
I'm sorry. I thought he was.
Well, it was both of them. So, Dr. Nash, I guess in terms of unintended consequences, do you have any concern, comment about that? Any assurances?
I am concerned, and so, which is why we tried to be pretty careful in crafting the legislation and make sure it wouldn't apply to that many properties. It's possible we were too careful, and now no one's going to meet the legal standards for accessory dwelling units, but we can adjust that in the future. I'd rather be too careful now than too expansive now. As it is, only 34% of properties in Annapolis are even qualify as being possibly able to have an accessory dwelling unit in terms of lot size. They would still have to meet other regulations like critical area and setbacks. So yeah, I have a pretty good comfort level in that we are not going to see a whole rash of them, which is what we wanted. We wanted to see, can we make small incremental changes, but in a careful enough way that we can change course in the future if need be.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. It's helpful to hear. And I was thinking the same thing. They'd still have to comply with critical area and all these other restrictions on lot coverage. I mean, the one thing I may want to give more thought and discussion at some point about is to make sure that they to kind of essentially beef up our tree protection standards for instances where because right now the trees are only protected if they're a certain amount of feet from the right of way. If they're in the back of a property, I'd hate to see them be able to clear, a 20-inch tree to build an accessory dwelling unit and not have to do any kind of mitigation for that.
Well, if you're getting a permit, we look at all the trees that are being impacted by the construction.
Okay. And thank you. And yes, Madam Chair, I did kind of want to hear more from, it sounds like Alderman Arnett has received a lot of concerns from his constituents. I'm just trying to better understand what the impacts are that they're concerned about, but I'll leave it up to you if you want him to answer now or not.
I know he can answer now. Just try not to make it personal. I'm thinking your neighbors are cringing as you're calling them out about their property. But please.
I make my neighbors cringe all the time. That's why they keep re-electing me. The concerns are exactly the same concerns as have been raised with the Forest Drive Esports sector study. This is a fundamental change to the neighborhood that people move to. Now, you can argue the greater good is we have this housing need, and I've read all the articles about it, and I've looked at the experiment in Minneapolis. But I do have a problem that this is a wholesale change in the community that people bought. I have done an analysis on my street, which I am personalizing it here. All of the existing units on my street, except for one next door neighbor, will qualify under this new rule. Every one of those can become a legal accessory dwelling unit. Every one of them will bring all of the parking and traffic and concentration issues that are the same ones that are being expressed over and over again with regard to the Forest Drive Esports sector study. So there's nothing new about the concerns. And I don't think there's any doubt that there will be unintended consequences. And I don't think there's any doubt that there will be a shortfall in enforcement because we can't enforce the rules we have in place now. We're not willing to invest in the size of the staff that we have now. We don't do it, and we rely entirely on citizen calling in with enforcement, such and such is doing so and so. And this isn't a critique of John Manessa and his staff. I think they struggle mightily to keep up with this stuff, but now we're adding on top of short-term rentals, we're now adding yet a whole nother cohort of things, which is going to require inspection staff on akin to the size of the fire department. I mean, I don't know how many people we're going to need to do this. Certainly, it's going to have to be a whole heck of a lot more people to keep this within bounds. So, Rob, the realization is there are always unintended consequences. You can't do anything. We can't make any change without that. The realization is it really is going to change existing neighborhoods. There's no doubt about that. In fact, that's the intent of the legislation.
Well, I think my point is I think a lot of those impacts are manageable. I mean, you know, the short-term rental legislation really resulted in and can result in wholesale community change. But that argument wasn't coming up at the time. But I think with this, it's actually more manageable. We can address the traffic, and I think Alderman Rodriguez has done a lot of that with his amendments.
So you actually did raise the comment about unintended consequences when you opposed the short-term rental legislation, and I think you were right.
I'd like to remind us, as we're talking about staff and increasing staff, where we are as far as our budget is concerned right now.
Right.
And if we can't take care of the staff that we already have. Alderman Gay.
Yeah, at some point, I'd just like to discuss the amendment that I wanted to include, as well as address some of the concerns that Ross, has said. And I think, to completely base the future of housing affordability off of one neighborhood and their concerns is ridiculous. And that's how we end up in the places we continue to end up in the city, where we don't step out and expand and make people want to live in the city and make it a new vibrant city, because we get afraid because the same 10 people come to the city council meetings and they complain about accessory dwelling units because they don't want druggies and long hairs in their backyard. I mean, this is where we are. It's disappointing. Everywhere else has managed to get some sort of ordinance on the books to help with this, except for us, because someone bought a house in 1976 and they don't want to see it in 2020 with a different look. I mean, it's insane to me. It really is, to halt the progression of a city based on the minority. And I also like to bring forth my amendment, which won't make me popular, but my amendment takes away the parking requirement for accessory dwelling units. Why? I point to where Portland, Oregon, what they said in Lexington, Kentucky, when they created the legislation. You make accessory dwelling units for people, not cars. And then I also look at legislation from research from Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, where they don't require, and Kentucky, where they don't require parking spots for cars. There's also facts that most people who live in accessory dwelling units don't own a car. So, I mean, all of this overhype that you're getting from, the loud minority is making a bill that could really help families and really push our city in a different direction. It's completely tearing it apart.
Ms. Green, do we have a motion on the floor?
I don't think so.
Ms. Green, do we have a motion on the floor?
No, ma'am, you do not.
Alderman Gay, are you making a motion?
I'm not. I want to. I'm continuing the discussion, but I do have, after you're done with the 1 through 3, I do have a Fourth Amendment. Okay.
Did we vote on 1 through 3 at the last meeting? Mr. Lyles has his hand up.
Yeah, I think the motions are made by your committee members, ma'am.
Right.
And the amendments can be formed, but one of your committee members has to move a motion.
Yes, you're right. Thank you. Did we vote, Ms. Green, on the Rodriguez amendments?
We didn't have them.
No, these are new.
Okay, these are new.
Yes.
So, Rob, are you?
Yeah, I would like to move a favorable recommendation for amendments 1 through 3.
If there's no second, I will second it. Okay. Further discussion, Alderman Arnett.
Yes. First of all, on a personal note, I've tried to be considerate of you, Dewan. I don't call you ridiculous, and I don't think my constituents should be called ridiculous. They have rights and feelings too. So I really do take objection to that statement. I know you felt uncomfortable with the earlier legislation and the position, and I tried to be sympathetic to that. But I would really caution in public statements that we not be calling anybody ridiculous. Everyone has rights and opinions. In terms of the amendments, I still don't have them. I really don't appreciate the fact that I don't have them. And I do think that there's something that I would like to have more information, such as what Dr. Nash talked about in terms of only affecting 34% of the city. That's interesting. What 34% of the city? Where are those impacts felt? I really would like to get more information on the meaning of striking the amendment, which I don't have in front of me anymore, of striking those lines on page 2, I guess it is, and what that does to existing units and so forth. So I certainly would urge, given the extensive amount of change that this would bring, that we be given more time to get information, both legal opinions, but also a show of where this would happen in the city, and an analysis, particularly if we do Amendment 4 from Alderman Gay about parking, an analysis of the impact of that. I thought that the testimony that John Hammond gave was particularly effective in terms of making an additional parking space off the street. Brings up lots of questions about the logistics of that. Lots of questions about if it's a driveway going back to a garage, is the car that is off the street parked in the driveway, and now you do all of that shuffle where when the car is in the garage that wants to get out, the car in the driveway has to move, all of those things. And I don't know how many of those situations are either.
Alderman, that's not on the table before us right now.
I understand.
It's the 3 amendments from Alderman Rodriguez. Alderman Rodriguez?
No, thank you. I mean, I think I'm good. I had something earlier, but I think it's been addressed. Thank you.
Sorry.
No worries.
Alderman Gay?
Madam Chair, we have had this legislation since I believe we started working on it in early August. It's been out, I think, since December or January. The information that Alderman Arnett is requesting has been out since February. You know, I think to continue to request information that has repeatedly been sent out to the public is stalling the legislation. We have made changes to meet the requirements requested by the Planning Commission. You know, I've sat down with members of the Planning Commission personally since January when this has been out. I mean, I just think to continue to stall this legislation and request information that we've had access to for months is a bit far.
Alderman Gay, I do not have that information, nor did I have these amendments. And so I think, again, I take exception to your characterization. They're not in my iPad. These amendments are not there, nor do I have the information that Dr. Nash, and I'm more than happy to receive that, and I would like to look at it and understand it, but I do not have these amendments nor that information.
Ms. Green, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I sent the amendments, like I think at 5:11, but I just resent them to you. Also, you may have to refresh your agenda, and then you may have them. Now, the amendments that were submitted by Alderman Gay are not attached, and I just emailed those to you as well. And Alderman
as Mr.
Savage,
Lyle
I'll email them
reminded
to
us,
you.
We need a committee member to sponsor those amendments. But did you just email them to us?
I emailed them to you before the meeting started. If you need me to email them again, I will. And Alderman Savage, I'll email them to you right now.
Okay.
Please, could you send them quickly so they'll be at the top of our email list? But right now we're dealing with the Rodriguez amendments. So is there a motion to support the Rodriguez amendments?
Yeah, so moved.
And I'll second that amendment or that motion. Further discussion? I think we've heard much. Seeing none, all in favor of the Rodriguez amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Opposed? Nay?
I'm sorry. You're right. Opposed?
No?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's it for there's only three of us. Okay. Do we have a sponsor for the gay amendments that we just received? I don't have it yet, but.
They still haven't come through for me.
Maybe for the sake of time, we want to.
How are those amendments labeled? I have something that says Amendment 1, Amendment 1, Amendment 2. Is that what I'm looking at? Takia? In your email, there were two attachments.
Yes. And
one is the Rodriguez amendments. The second one looks like it's two additional amendments.
the longer page is from Alderman Gay. Yes. If you look at the screen, that's from Alderman Gay, the longer one.
Oh, what is this with Amendment 1, parking and loading resolutions, Amendment 2, planning and zoning, Chapter 38? That's not what this is about.
That is the amendments that Alderman Gay has submitted.
Those are the amendments.
I'm only seeing one amendment. Is that correct?
I'm not seeing these amendments that are on the screen.
There is only one, that one that's on the screen.
So I don't know what this other thing is, but so Takia, you didn't send it to us in mail. We can look at it here though.
I have sent them to you. You have two attachments.
Right.
Yeah, they did come through now, yeah.
The one that is on the screen was submitted by Alderman Gay. And the other attachment is labeled Amendments 1 through 3, Rodriguez.
Okay, but what is attachment 1 and what is attachment 2? Attachment 2 looks like it's something to do with planning and zoning, Chapter 38, regulations applicable to all districts, Section 2138.020 uses.
That's Alderman Gay's amendments.
So there's two amendments or one amendment?
For Alderman Gay, he has two amendments.
Oh, no, the second one is scratched. The second one is scratched. I thought she would put it in a different form. We discussed to pull that.
Alderman Gay, do you have a sponsor for your amendment on the committee?
I do not. It was originally supposed to be added to the file, but I got it in late. So I'm seeing if someone would, though. Would you sponsor it for me, Sheila, please? And thank you.
Well, as the chair, I could second it for you. I don't think, well, I could. Hoping Alderman Savage would sponsor it and I'd second it.
Madam Chair, may I chime in about that?
Yes, please.
So I'm hesitant to discuss it without a second, but I think it's worth discussing because
I will
of the parking
I will
issue.
second it.
I'm not at this point willing to make a motion because I think it would be a mistake to remove any kind of parking requirement. I think what would be a better course of action would be to stick with what's in legislation requiring a parking spot, but allowing them to, if, for example, it just proves to be unfeasible to add off-street parking, that they can apply for a variance with planning and zoning. But that still allows, so that would allow them an out, but it would still default to requiring parking. And I think that's important to keep in there because that is one of the primary concerns I've heard from that Alderman Arnett voice from his residents. And I do think we need to be responsive to their concerns. So at this point, I'm not willing to co-sponsor unless Alderman Gay can convince me.
It's not even worth me to convince it. I don't even care. We watered the bill down so much. At this point, I'm happy with amendments 1 through 3. And this will be the city's attempt at accessory dwelling units.
Okay, well, with that being said, we do have a motion on the floor. It's been properly seconded. I guess we have to vote down the motion.
Wait a minute. We don't have a motion on the floor.
Alderman Savage, I thought.
No, he didn't. He said he didn't want to make the motion. So we never had a motion.
Then there is no motion on the floor. I misunderstood him. Okay, so as it is, we stand with 03919 as amended with the Rodriguez amendments. Alderman Savage.
Thank you. I did have just something else I wanted on the parking lot. I did want to ask Dr. Nash, is this something where can they currently file for variance if it does prove to be just impossible to add off-street parking?
Not currently. Not if Alderman Rodriguez's amendments are approved, then no.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it may be worth including, I suppose, if we want to increase, because that is going to be a limiting factor, I imagine, in some areas on the ADUs.
It will be a pretty big limiting factor, especially in Ward 8. So I think it's really Ward 2 that's going to be most of the eligible properties for this legislation. But that's something, again, in line with our being overly careful now. We can change later if need be, if we don't get if no one qualifies.
Okay, thank you.
Sponsors aren't worried, then yeah, that's works for me.
If there's no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion to recommend approval of 03919 as amended.
Sorry, I had one other thing, Madam Chair. Sorry. Just a quick, this is something that Montgomery County had included in their legislation, which was requiring that essentially they had to get permission put up notice so the neighbors can testify in support or opposition. I don't necessarily feel strongly either way, but I kind of just wanted to bring that up for discussion. I don't know if that would help address Alderman Arnett's concern.
Like we did with chickens.
Right.
Yes.
Accessory chickens or just chickens?
Okay, I will entertain a motion to support 03919 as amended.
Madam Chair, I didn't really catch what Alderman Savage said about Montgomery County. Could that be repeated?
Just that they required neighbor permission, some kind of neighbor public notice sign off as a part of that before they granted the permit.
Well, if we're going to do accessory dwelling units, I don't think you want that because I think there would be very few sign-offs, and that really is like what Sheila said. They wanted to do that with chickens, and that ended up being a morass, and we ended up with many more illegal chicken coops than legal chicken coops because nobody asked for their neighbor's permission. So, I mean, if the goal is to really have accessory dwelling units, I guess while I find that appealing, I'm sure my constituents would love it. I think that would be counterproductive myself.
Is there a motion, Alderman Savage?
Yes, I move to approve, recommend favorably as amended with the Alderman Rodriguez amendment.
Okay, and I'll second that. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you to the committee members. I'm going to sign off now.
Oh, now you get off. Now that your issue is done. Thank you, Alderman Rodriguez. You should have to stay for the whole meeting.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Before
Okay, the
Sally
next
goes,
item.
Sheila, before Sally, did I hear you say that the primary impact of this is on Ward 2?
If you look at the map that's attached with the email I sent, is on our webpage. Most of the lot size eligible properties are in Ward 2. So those are the ones, that's the area where they're the most lots who could have a legal ADU in Ward 2.
Dr. Nash, can you send that out to us?
I did. I sent an email with the link, but it's on the planning and zoning webpage.
You just sent it out today?
Just now, or a few minutes ago.
Oh, I found it. Yeah, thank you.
I don't have it yet, but I'm sure it's on this one.
Okay, next item on the agenda is 0520. City Council meetings, order of business for the purpose of modifying the order of business for regular and special meetings.
This is removed. This was removed from the agenda.
Removed. Okay, that's right. All right, next item, 0720, designated loading zones for the purpose of authorizing designated loading zones in the city of Annapolis, creating certain definitions and generally related to designated loading zones. Nothing like repetition about loading zones. Ellie, is this your Alderwoman Tierney?
This is my last.
Mr. Gordon is with Mr. Gordon. Are you?
Dwan is a sponsor. I'm co-sponsoring.
Okay. Mr. Gordon, you want to speak to this before the sponsors?
Sure, I can. Good evening.
Good evening.
I had this before you all, I believe, a few weeks ago, and on April 14th. And at the time, there were several questions about the legislation, and I sent a response to those concerns. If you like, I can back up and maybe talk a little bit about the legislation again. It is designated loading zones where we were attempting to create shared use loading zones that would allow, in addition to commercial vehicles, taxis and transportation network companies to use those loading zones for drop off and pickup of passengers. In the meeting on the 14th, there were several questions about the definition of the shared use loading zone, site selection and review process, and the criteria for selection of a site. And I believe you all should have copies of that information. Rosh is shaking your head. I sent it to you specifically.
I don't see any attachments
It's not
to
attached to the legislation, but I certainly am prepared to discuss the same issues we discussed before, if you want to go into that.
Well, I'm looking at the notes that are attached from the meeting on the April meeting.
It's on the screen now.
Okay, is this the rewording? Because my note says that I requested that you work with the city attorney and the city manager to reword it.
That's exactly right.
So what we're getting. Okay. So where is this to go? Under definition?
It could. That's up to you all if you want it in there.
Shared use zoning zones restricted, time-based. So we'll have to go through the whole thing, but my general concerns about this were, first of all, the way the code is written, it has nothing to do with the Department of Transportation. It is Public Works, it does not limit where these loading zones could be to any part of the city. And in fact, it makes it available to every part of the city. And then I was surprised to learn that there was a parking committee that meets to make these decisions. I don't know what the authority is of that parking decision to make those decisions, but I don't think the council has ceded its powers to the parking committee to make decisions about loading zones anywhere in the city, which this is available anywhere in the city. So, I can't scroll it down because I don't have this in front of me, but I'm trying to see. I see now where traffic engineer, Department of Public Works, but I don't see the parking meets the regular basis parking work group. But that does. Where's the authority to determine where these zones are? Who has that authority? In the code as it's written now, that's the Director of Public Works.
The authority is essentially shared with Department of Transportation and the Department of Public Works. If you can scroll down a little more, you'll see the selection criteria, and that it includes the affected alderperson before a final decision is made. The parking work group essentially identifies the sites that we believe would be suitable for shared use. And those sites would be vetted by that work group, inclusive of myself and the Department of Public Works. And once the sites are vetted, the final selection would be sent to the affected alderperson. And after you all review it and sign off on it, then we will pursue.
But we will now turn it over to
Mr. Gordon. For some reason, I thought I remember you saying there were only 2 locations that you were considering. Is that inaccurate?
There are no specific locations at this time. The locations that we would consider would be those that are in more popular areas, restaurant areas, entertainment areas. So we haven't selected any locations at this point.
Okay.
But first of all, this is not in amendment form. Second, so I would certainly turn to the city attorney. And this now gives some unsatisfactory review. Does that mean that an alderman of their own, without a majority vote on the part of the council, can say no to the department directors, no, you can't have a parking space there or a loading zone there?
It would be expected that once the site is brought to your attention, you would, I guess, review it with the businesses that are affected by it, and then bring a decision back. And if that decision is no, then we wouldn't move forward with it. Remember, it's only allowing taxis and TNCs to drop off and pick up passengers, and it will only occur towards the afternoon and evenings. We don't expect that there's that many taxis or people using TNCs in the morning and earlier in the day when commercial vehicles are delivering their goods.
Now, look, I fully understand and actually support the intent of this ordinance. What I can't support, though, is it's so entirely open-ended. I think it's illegal. I don't think, and I'm looking to the city attorney to weigh in on this, I don't think an alderman unilaterally and singularly under the code has the right to say no to a department director. I would think that the alderpersons can only operate in conjunction with actions before the city council. So, I'm really still very concerned about, I understand what you want to do, but the way this is written, it's totally open. It is totally open-ended. These zones can go anywhere in the city. I understand where you intend them to go, but that's not what the code says. The code says that the department, the planning and zoning director, and now if we include an amendment here, transportation director can create these loading zones. And there is no limitation about where they can go. It's implied that these are for commercial vehicles, but taxi cabs go everywhere in the city. So I think it's the open-endedness of this, the lack of drawing it down to directly speak to the issues that the issues that are before the in the legislation, but get it to where you really want it to be. My sense is you really want this to be in commercial areas downtown and maybe some other places. That would include, one would presume, commercial areas on 4th Street in Eastport, 6th Street in Eastport, shopping center in Eastport, a lot of places in Eastport that are not the typical places where cabs have loading zones.
Could I ask Mr. Lyles to speak to the legal ramifications here?
Well, I'm kind of confused, only because it appears to me that the request to even develop this particular segment of the language that you're seeing in front of you was, I guess, in a meeting of either the rules or the rules committee prior to today. So I'm not sure that this is really all germinating from the department. So that's probably part of my confusion. I think if you want the department, Public Works, Transportation, it really doesn't matter. The request would be to the city manager to develop an approach that would sit well with the rules committee, in my view. And the department that is overseeing is irrelevant, because the city manager is the one that ultimately controls all of it anyway, on behalf of the city council.
Mr. Lyles, you're correct in that the Rules Committee asked for additional information. And when we were told, in our discussion, that there was some conflict between departments, we asked that our city manager, former director of planning and zoning, get together with you and the transportation director to work out the details, which I guess explains what we have in front of us now.
Exactly, because there is an overlap. And so it kind of germinates from the fact, the confusion here germinates from the fact that there is an overlap between a committee and two agencies or departments within government. You know, if you had never asked for that, the ordinance as it sits in front of the council is the ordinance as amended anyway, is what you have. And so really, I'm not sure where you want us to go.
Well, is the language that speaks to the alderman weighing in the legislation? I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing it under the selection criteria that's outlined in the notes here, that's on the screen. But is that anywhere in the language here in the ordinance?
Well, I'm seeing upon satisfactory review, sites will require the approvals of agencies and the alderperson. I don't think that the alderperson's authority lines up there. If the council wants a review and an approval, then that's what should happen. But one particular alderperson making decisions that are within the purview of the city manager seems to be bleeding over a little bit.
Yeah, I would say it's very dangerous. Madam Chair,
may I finish? Mr. Lyles, if we change that to simply say notification of the alderperson as opposed to approval of?
Yeah, that would help. That would make sense. Yeah.
I would strenuously object to that. That means that the department, whatever department this is, makes the decision, and oh, by the way, we decided to do that. So what we have in front of us is commentary. It's not amendments. It's not in the form of amendments. I don't think that it has been vetted by the city attorney to turn it into amendments. And my objection all along has not been to the intent of the legislation. It has been to what is explicitly written in the legislation, and what is explicitly written in the legislation gives the Director of Public Works the authority to create one of these zones anywhere in the city for no stated purpose whatsoever. And I think that is way, way too loose. It doesn't even speak to the intent as expressed by the author, the sponsor of the legislation, although it is fully unclear to me at this point what that intent is.
Madam Chair.
I just asked the question of the city attorney if the language was in the legislation, and I thought he said yes. And
not really. This is all new because the council was asking transportation to come back with the language, and I guess with our help. But I'm really unsure as to how it all relates to the initial legislation. The initial legislation, if you remember, was really a sign legislation. A sign would go up in current places where loading zones are, and the signs would allow for POV, rental to use those in certain circumstances and certain times during the week. And that's really all this is. And we would then communicate with those companies so that those locations already designated as loading zones would then be used also for these purposes. So it's really, I think we've kind of gone far afield from what was initially put forth in the legislation.
so let me ask the members of the committee, are you satisfied with the legislation as amended in its original form?
No.
I hate to disregard
Sure.
but not giving account to what's on the screen now.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Sorry, I can't see you, so.
It's okay. So I don't have too many concerns, but I do want to make sure that our colleague from Ward 8 here has his concerns addressed in this. And I think it'd be, perhaps we need to postpone this again and send this back to the law office for proper drafting and to work with our colleague from Ward 8 to before we make any determination on it.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Gay.
Yeah, I don't know. Let me start. I'm not sure what is taking place today or what's taking place in Ward 8 with the nitpicking of the individual, like down to the little. This is not, again, as the city attorney just mentioned, we are completely way off the mark in what the intent of the legislation is. It has nothing to do with, the Department of Public Works or going around just placing, random loading zones in Ward 8. It was solely so that we could get a clear understanding of where we would like loading zones to be in the downtown area so that we could craft a letter to Uber and Lyft and other rideshare organizations to create specific loading zones within the individual app, so that already when you are picked up or dropped off, it drops you up at a specific location that does not interfere with the flow of traffic.
Madam Chair.
I was waiting. Alderman Gay, you're finished? Thank you. Alderman Arnett.
So again, I have absolutely no problem with what Alderman Gay is stating is the desire, but I have total problem with the legislation because as written, it does not do that. If you go to page 2, section D, starting with line 7, there is nothing in there about spaces downtown. There is nothing in there about for Uber or any other drivers. This clearly says that these spaces can be designated anywhere on public roads in the city. So it has nothing to do with narrowing it down to downtown. It has nothing to do with who it's for, those sorts of things. And then when you go on to page 3 and you look at that, it is specifically to the Director of Public Works, does not mention the Director of Transportation at all, does not mention this parking committee, does not mention any of the things that are in this narrative that we have up on the screen in front of us, which are interesting, but are not amendments to the code. And it is getting amendments to the code through the city attorney is what we asked for the last time from this committee, not a general narrative about what might happen. The code is the code, and what the code says is what is enforceable. And what the code says is not enforceable. And this code, as it's written, does not say what Alderman Gay says he wants to have occur. And that's all I'm asking for, is that the code be written specifically to include where this is to occur, why it's to occur, who has the authority to do it, and the process. And I would like some process where there is a council process so that if there are loading zones that start to show up in neighborhoods, that there's some process for the council to be able to weigh in on that. But that none of that is in here at all.
Alderman Arnett, on page 2, the first section that you referenced does speak to, and it's the definition, which is what's new, the designated loading space definition. That does clearly, to me, speak to those network service organizations, those ride share organizations. So that is in there.
No, it's not.
I'm reading it.
Within a roadway in the city. It doesn't say anything about where this is occurring. The loading means an area or space officially set apart within a roadway for exclusive use of drivers.
Alderman, as last I checked, roadways are where we park.
Yes, throughout the entire city, not in downtown.
This is simply a definition. I think it's clear that we're not prepared, and I think Alderman Savage spoke to this, that we're not prepared to act on this legislation today. I think the Director Gordon and probably City Manager Gerald or Director Patrick and Mr. Lyles have all heard the concerns. And Alderman Gay, if you will work with them to address the concerns of the aldermen, unless Alderman Savage, you're ready to act on this legislation. I thought I heard you say you wanted to postpone.
Yeah, I would like to postpone. I also, if I could point out for Alderman Gay that, it'd be nice if we could have some time to work on this. But just to remind you, we do have a 90-day rule where after 90 days, legislation will come back to the council regardless of what the committee does or does not do. So it's not going to be held up indefinitely. But I think if we have one more meeting, we'll be able to take care of this.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In any sort of revision, I would highly suggest that to help with the process misunderstanding, I think it would be helpful if we reiterated definitions per the city code to appease my colleague Alderman Arnett's concern. In other words, who is the authorized agent to enforce our parking program? I think that needs to be reiterated because I believe there's some question here on where this decision is made, then confused even more about how the alderman is involved. Director Gordon, are you there?
I am still here. Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, because there you have that authority, and I think that should be reiterated in a process. Not here.
I'll entertain a motion to postpone action on this legislation until our next meeting.
So move.
Second.
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Okay, next item. Zoning code applications, written notification requirement for the purpose of increasing the distance for sending written notification to abutting property owners for planned developments, major subdivisions, and major site design applications.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I recommend the committee recommend approval.
Second.
I will tell you that I have had lots of emails and discussion, mainly from zoning lawyers around town. They talk about the difficulty of notifying so many people, and they talk about the difficulty where there are condominiums or apartments, finding the direct owner of, and who's the right person to be addressed. I would suggest we ask Dr. Nash, but I've suggested to them that the city, while it's not required to, through Sean Wampler, has always been very helpful in helping applicants get these addresses. It is a major expansion, but I think that it's an expansion that's warranted given how sensitive developments are in the city these days.
I was going to ask Dr. Nash to join us again. Here she is.
Hello.
Would you like to speak to this legislation?
Right. Well, so this hasn't gone to Planning Commission yet. It's going to June 4th, just to let you know that part. I think that there is a concern about notification and how hard it is for people to figure it out if they are representing themselves. That is why I asked Alderman Gay if we could limit it to planned developments and the larger projects where they usually have an attorney and other kind of professional support who knows how to do the notification requirements. Our staff and Sean really don't have time to help people with that part of the application. And a lot of my staff feels nervous about providing that kind of support in case they do something wrong. So we really don't want to be in the habit of helping people prepare their applications. But in this case, I think limiting it to these larger projects is, okay, because there's more professional support for the application preparations.
This legislation hasn't gone to the Planning Commission yet?
No, it's going June 4th. Okay. I think it's deal with our issue with that. We've been working on trying to get the public hearings orders situated so it doesn't go to City Council public hearing until it's been to Planning Commission public hearing, but that's not quite sorted out yet.
Okay, Alderman Savage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of this. We started the conversation back, what was it, last year, Alderman Arnett, when you had, what was it, some legislation we had that Hyatt was working on.
Right.
And we mentioned revisiting this, so I'm glad that Alderman Gay has done it for us. And it sounds reasonable to have it limited to larger projects. I know it can be difficult determining who exactly owns properties, but in terms of distribution, I think a simple mail drop canvassing is quite an easy way to get the notice out to residents. All that said, though, I would kind of like to hear what the Planning Commission has to say before we make a decision. I think if that's not in the code, I think we need to clarify that.
It is in the code. The code is very clear that we shouldn't be getting this until after it's gone to the Planning Commission. It's in Title 2, Section 16, but we don't seem to be.
So
I am going to suggest that we not address this legislation until it comes back to us after the Planning Commission has heard it. So there is a motion on the floor. Takia, can we simply withdraw that motion?
Yes.
Or
you can vote it down.
I will draw the motion to recommend approval. I will further note that I do think that there's reason to be sympathetic to what Dr. Nash is saying for individuals, but for large projects. And so maybe I will go to the planning commissioner testified. For those large projects, I think we can say for large projects, you have to do this. For smaller projects, maybe we go back to the old limits or whatever. I know when I've done applications, the city's been very good at getting the addresses for me and for others, but I think Dr. Nash is right. That's not a city function. It's been done because the city people are good people, not because they are under requirement. And I think Sally's right also to be worried about if there's a mistake, who gets zapped for that. So.
Okay, thank you for withdrawing your motion, Mr. Laws.
The second will need to be withdrawn as well.
I'm sorry? The second needs to be withdrawn also, that's right. Alderman Savage, will you withdraw your second?
Yes.
Okay, so I need a motion to postpone action on 01020.
I'll move to postpone action.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Next item is 01120, City Council meetings, attendance. For the purpose of allowing a member of the City Council to attend a regularly scheduled council meeting by electronic means, placing limitations on remote attendance in general related to attending council meetings remotely. Nothing like reading these from my phone.
I move the committee recommend approval.
Second.
I cannot believe the amount of text messaging this generated last night, and irate, angry text messaging. But clearly the technology exists to do it whether you're disabled or not, but we have long had an issue where various members were disabled, and really we did want them to participate, and now we know they can. And this is what makes that legal.
Absolutely. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of making a recommendation for 01120, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And the last item, municipal infractions, 01220. The process for the purpose of clarifying that municipal infraction enforcement actions are processed through the Office of Law and making stylistic changes. And is this, of course, who's the sponsors? The mayor, the sponsor? Mr. Laws, would you like to speak to this?
No,
Ellie, I'm sorry, I can't get it open, of course, the last one.
Yeah, this is just a simple change to the way municipal infractions are processed. In the past, municipal infractions, or up until this amendment or code amendment goes through, the municipal infractions are handled by in the case of parking, by the contractors. And in many cases, there's no attorney representing the city in these transactions in court. And so our success rate of getting these has been less than 50%. So we think that because we handle many other infractions, that we just take these on as well and have lawyers representing the city in the courtroom. So all of the infractions will come to the city, we'll process them, and if we can't do them, we'll find a way to get them done and hopefully have legal representation in court.
And so my question is, you have the manpower to do this? This
year, yeah. Next year, the year after, we may come back, and once we see how it goes. But the fact that we do have the flexibility to maybe hire outside counsel if necessary puts us in a better position, because right now, no lawyer at all is going, and we want to make sure that at least we have control over whether a lawyer does go or whether it's not necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Make them pay.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Yes, I just want to add that I understand the existing code is somewhat flawed in the sense that it was up to planning and zoning. And so that's why this had to be changed. I don't think planning and zoning wants to show up at court.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve 01220?
I think I made that motion to recommend approval.
Okay, I'm sorry. And it was seconded?
Yes, I'll second.
No further, or is there further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of making a recommendation to support ordinance 1220, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And I think that finishes our agenda.
Madam Chair, can I make a comment for the good of the order?
No. Of course you can.
I have some serious concerns about some of the decorum at today's meeting. I think we all need to treat each other with respect. I understand things get emotional. I get emotional too. But I really do take objection to some of the statements that were made characterizing things or people as ridiculous, characterizing them as being stonewalled or delayed, characterizing them as being all of the different things. And I don't know, maybe this is, I don't know who we bring this up to, but I think it's really up to us to police that. It's up to the mayor to police it when we have problems of decorum at city council meetings, but I do take strong exception to some of the statements that were made today.
Alderman, I totally agree. And I think we all have to be a little more cautious of the terminology that we use with one another, here and at other times also. So I think we just all need to be a little more cognizant of one another's feelings. Some words shatter some people and not others. So we have to keep that in mind also. And I think it's very healthy to say what's bothersome and what's offensive to us, because we all are very different. So I think we should all be very cautious. And I guess Regina, I'll call Regina and tell her, or maybe it's Mr. Lyles that should keep us respectful and on track. I see his eyes.
I think we've given
Mr. Lyles. Just kidding, Regina.
Yeah.
I'll entertain a motion if there's no further business of the committee.
Just one last thought. It's up to the chair, the mayor, or the chair of the committee to control the decorum. But
that is true.
Anyway, I'm very unhappy about some of the statements and the way they were made.
Okay.
Just second both of your comments on that. I do agree.
Thank you. Would you also like to make a motion that we adjourn?
Yes, I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye. Thank you, all of you. Ellie for joining us, Mr. Lyles for hanging with us, and Sally, Takia, of course. Do you need to stay on and talk to Ross?